From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Meet Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Their chefs handle the shopping and chopping, delivering fresh, fully cooked meals to your door. All you have to do is heat and enjoy. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences, like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. And if you're looking to lose weight, Factor's keto meals can help you lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks. Savor nutritious, premium meals no matter how busy life gets. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factor50off and use code FACTOR50OFF to get 50% off, plus free shipping on your first box. Weight loss with Factor Keto based on randomized controlled clinical trial. Results will vary depending on diet and exercise.
The world is facing urgent, monumental issues, and you may be considering a career change where you can make a global impact, even if you don't know where to begin. In the heart of Washington, D.C., gain world-renowned expert knowledge and a global network as you pursue a master's degree and turn your new passion into practice. Thousands of the world's leaders found their purpose at the George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. Are you next?
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. What is the correct way to say this city's name?
Louisville.
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 Today, we're exploring the origins of this city's name, the debate over its correct pronunciation, and how it has evolved over time. We'll also dive into Kentucky's diverse dialects and what makes the state's language truly unique. I'm joined today by Dr. Jennifer Cramer, a professor of linguistics at the University of Kentucky. She holds a PhD in linguistics from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and she specializes in sociolinguistics and discourse analysis. Her research focuses on language variation and change in Appalachia, the American South, and Kentucky. In addition to her academic work, Dr. Cramer serves as chair of the board of directors for the Kentucky Humanities Council and is the senior associate editor of the journal American Speech. Dr. Cramer, thanks for joining us on Track.
Hi, thank you. Happy to be here.
Before we jump in, can you speak a little bit about what you do as a linguistics expert and how you approach the study of language?
Sure. Well, linguists are really interesting characters. We study language from quite a different perspective than many people have encountered before they meet one of us. We are definitely more interested in what people actually do with language as opposed to what they're supposed to do or what they should do. We're documenting what regular everyday folks have to say about language and how it works. That's what I focus on. That's the idea that people have certain beliefs about how language works, and they use those in navigating their social worlds. But from a broad perspective, linguists are really interested in the tiny little minutia of what goes on in language. I happen to focus on Kentucky English, but we study all the world's languages. And we can study them from various perspectives, whether we're looking at how they use different words, how they use different sounds, how they use different structures, but basically kind of digging in under our microscope, looking at language as our object of study.
So you're studying language, you're studying words, but it also kind of sounds like you're a detective for words and speech in a way, figuring out kind of why people talk the way they do. So I kind of want to get into this mystery of how we got to the city's pronunciation of Louisville. And by the end of this, the way I'm saying it right now might end up somewhere different. So I just want to start from the historic perspective. Where did Louisville get its name?
So the city was named for King Louis in France, Louis XVI. And so in French, he would have been Louis, or Louis is the best English approximation of that word. And we have the name spelled the same way. Some people go by Louis, some people go by Louis. But that would be the origin. So ville just means city in French. So this is Louis' city.
So, and I'm thinking of King Louis. He's King Louis XVI. He's the one we know betrothed to Marie Antoinette, the last king of France before the French Revolution. And I know he was a helper in the American Revolutionary War. This is who the city is named after. So by historic knowledge, shouldn't the pronunciation be Louisville?
One might guess historically that could be true, and it makes a lot of sense from that perspective. I actually was reading recently. There's an old document, and I have to go dig it up. But it was a kind of a cataloging of Kentucky place names and how they're differently pronounced. It's very old, but they mentioned that there's some possibility that the original settlers wanted to call it Louisville because of the spelling. But I don't think anyone actually calls it that now. So I'm a little fuzzy on whether that was ever the case. From its spelling, it looks like it could be, but from my knowledge, no one in the city or familiar with the city calls it Louisville, at least in Kentucky. I believe I've been told that the one in Colorado that's spelled exactly the same way, I think they pronounce it Louisville.
Yes, I've heard that as well. Okay, so even at the beginning of everything, it sounds like this has been a debate of what the city's name is. So how did we get from there, whether it was Louisville or Louisville, to now Louisville? How did this like phonetic evolution happen?
Well, that's a really great question. And one of the things that we have to start with is the idea that it's a place name. So that's where I'll start, and I'll come to the phonetics in a minute. So one of the things we know about place names, and really a lot of borrowings from other languages, and English is well known as a borrower of words. We're a Germanic language, but something like 80% of our terminology comes from the Romance language family: Latin, Spanish, French, Italian, and so on. So when we borrow words into a language, it's very common for us to try to make it fit how our language sounds. So any words that we would borrow, we try our best to fit it into our current sound system, especially when we don't have certain sounds that the other language does. And this happens in all the world's languages. One of the examples I often give my students is that the word baseball had been borrowed into Japanese. And I don't speak Japanese, but I believe it's pronounced something like Beisubaru when they borrow it into Japanese, because it has to fit their sound system. So one of the things that very often happens when we borrow words is that it won't sound like the original language. That's really common. We say burrito, which is not like a Spanish speaker would say that same word. That being said, place names are particularly special because they become really commonly pronounced. They're regularly used by that particular group of people. And so really common words are the ones that are most likely to change in their pronunciation over time. And so it becomes really common among that group. They get used to saying it over and over again, and then it starts to have a kind of a life of its own. So what Kentuckians do to call their city Louisville, or people down the road from me in Lexington calling their town Versailles, that becomes a very important local marker of identity. If you don't say it like we do, we know you're an outsider. So that's an important part about this question. The other important part is the part you said about the phonetics. So in English in particular, it's really common for us to take multisyllable words like Louisville and sort of centralize or reduce, in some ways, people say, some of the vowels that don't have the stress. So in a word like Louisville, the punch is on that first syllable. We'd call that the stressed syllable. The other two are not stressed, so they end up getting centralized. And the most common sound in English is the sound for this reason. So the first trip from Louisville to Louisville or Lou-uh-vull, both of those last two syllables are unstressed. So they would be likely candidates for this kind of centralization.
So over time, we've kind of just like mumbled them together. It's like we've stressed it. And
it's not mumbling because we do this across the language. So this is not just something that's particular to Louisville. This is actually to English. And so a good example of this happening is a word like family. Very few people say family. They're much more likely to say family or even family, which would be the explanation I would give for why some people don't just say Lou-uh-vull with 3 syllables. They actually say Louisville with 2. And that's because that middle one is so unstressed as to be unimportant in its pronunciation. So just like family becomes two syllables for many speakers, especially in fast connected speech. Then you have the same kind of thing. So we do like to jokingly say it's like talking with marbles in your mouth, but really it's the exact same thing that we do in other words. And crucially, there's nothing really easier or garbled about making the sound compared to all the other sounds we have in English. It's just a different configuration of your vocal tract.
Right. Yeah. And for me, as when I first came to Louisville, I found it was like quite a fancy pronunciation, and I felt, like you said, I felt part of this identity, and I love that you spoke about that because I think that's really important. It sort of answers the question of like, why do we feel so strongly about this pronunciation? It's because of identity, right?
Absolutely. And that's exactly what my research is focused on, is this notion of what kinds of identities do Kentuckians take on, and particularly Louisvillians. And they're really in this interesting middle of the road location in American dialects, because the Ohio River has long served a geopolitical, socio-historical boundary to the South. And so is Louisville in the South? Well, by one definition, yes. But if you talk to Louisvillians, you get a very mixed bag understanding of how they feel about their regional identities. And you're exactly right that idea that we feel very proud of our local pronunciations and that we can use it to tell an outsider. This happens in every place that has a pronunciation that is at least noted. Obviously, if everybody calls it the same thing, no matter if you're from there or not, then there's probably not as much debate. But this does happen in other places.
Well, I do have a little bit of a question in this mystery of like that I've heard so many different people who are born and raised in Louisville, just miles apart from each other, say it differently. Why does that happen, or how does that happen?
Well, that's great. And in fact, you know that the Tourism Bureau in Louisville really grabbed a hold of that I would guess that was in the 80s, maybe early 90s, when they made their image that had all the different pronunciations of the city. And essentially, the only thing I think people from the area agree on is it's not Louisville. um, and so what's really fascinating to me is the linkage to identity, but also, when we're talking about this, people often want to say, and I think you even said it in the beginning, what's the right way? We're so eat up with the idea that there is a proper right way. But I told you what I do as a linguist. I don't care what the grammar book says. I don't care what the dictionary says. I want to know what real everyday people do. But I think some of what people are reacting to when there's the difference in someone saying Louisville versus Louisville and all the others is sometimes they're reacting to that notion that there's some prescriptive correct. They might get this idea from, for example, the media. I'm trying to remember. I haven't lived in Louisville in a long time. I grew up there, but it's been a while. If I remember, though, many of the broadcasters on the nightly news wouldn't say Louisville or Louisville. They would say something more like Louisville. And that sort of starts to then stand in for what is standard. And people will use that to sort of deride the other ways. So when people want to say, saying Louisville is lazy, they're often saying it because they think you're supposed to say Louisville. But frankly, as I've said, it's all the same. Now you're right. It's really interesting when they grow up in that close knit community and they don't say the same thing. I think my mother and I actually pronounce it differently. I think she says Louisville and I said Louisville. And so how does that happen? We grew up in the same house, or we're living in the same house. So how does that happen? And I do think some of these external factors are going to come into play. Things like, are you trying to be like the correct? Or even this notion that I mentioned about my research, are Louisvillians Southern or not? If you grow up thinking you're not, perhaps you think those other pronunciations would mark you as being Southern. I don't know if that's true. There's nothing particularly Southern in Louisville versus Louisville, I don't think. But maybe people started to get a sense that would mark them as being something else.
So it's a mix of like ideologies, but also like evolution of sound and identity, all kind of influencing this, even miles apart. So then you would say, based on what we're talking about, there really isn't a correct pronunciation of Louisville, right?
I wouldn't say there is one. I'd say that the best you can hope for is what the locals will agree to. And I don't think even a wonderful little discussion like this is going to settle the case. For most Louisvillians, they're going to keep fighting about it.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of like pride in it and, like we said, identity. Well, we'll continue this conversation after the break. You're on track with Louisville Public Media.
Ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Meet Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Their chefs handle the shopping and chopping, delivering fresh, fully cooked meals to your door. All you have to do is heat and enjoy. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences, like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. And if you're looking to lose weight, Factor's keto meals can help you lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks. Savor nutritious, premium meals no matter how busy life gets. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factor50off and use code FACTOR50OFF to get 50% off, plus free shipping on your first box. Weight loss with Factor Keto based on randomized controlled clinical trial. Results will vary depending on diet and exercise.
For a limited time, you can get KFC chicken with the sweet heat of hot honey. And after one bite, you'll wonder, how do bees make hot honey so hot? Are they special bees? Does KFC have dragon bees? Fire-breathing dragon bees that create spicy honey? No, silly, there's no such thing. KFC just partnered with Mike's Hot Honey to drizzle all over their crispy chicken. But dragon bees would be so cool. Try it now for only $7 or share a box with friends for $25. Prices and participation vary while supplies last. Taxes, tips, and fees extra.
I'm Aisha Jaffer, and you're listening to On Track. I'm here with Dr. Jennifer Cramer, professor of linguistics at the University of Kentucky, and we're talking about the unique evolution of words and language here in Kentucky. Dr. Cramer, what made you interested in focusing on the study of language in Kentucky specifically?
That's a really good question. So the first part has to be to how did I find linguistics in the first place? So I did my undergrad at UK, and I was actually a math major. And I thought I was going to be a math teacher one day. And I was struggling a little in one of my classes. And I was really enjoying the French classes I was having to take as part of my major. And I was like, yeah, I think I want to switch. So I switched to French and I became a French major. And I was going to be a French teacher. And at the time we had this study, you had to have an area of concentration. And I didn't know what that meant if it wasn't related. So I asked my professor, there's this thing called linguistics. What's that? He's like, study a language. So I took a class and I fell in love because linguistics represented this really interesting connection of my French brain and my math brain. It's a really wonderful meeting in the middle of the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. We do it all. So once I got the bug. I continued on to graduate school. I did a degree at Purdue University, and then I went on to the University of Illinois. And when I was at Illinois and I was deciding what I wanted to study, I had an advisor, and his thing was, you have to do something you love. You have to care about what you do. And I've always loved being a Kentucky girl. And so I wanted to do something with Kentucky. And I knew growing up, I had this inkling that some people thought they were Southern and others didn't. And you could even see that, I don't know if it's still true today, but if you kind of went back and looked at old telephone books, you would find things like Midwest Moving Company and Southern Moving Company, both in the same city. And so I just wanted to know, I said, well, so am I Southern or not? And I've been in rooms where somebody from New York and somebody from Tennessee, they're trying to debate me. The New Yorker's like, she's so Southern, and the Tennessee person's like, no, she's not. So I wanted to know, well, are we or not? And so that's kind of what got me into starting with Louisville, trying to understand that sort of in-between nature. And then, of course, the natural expansion of that was, well, what else is happening in the state? And so that's kind of how I got intrigued.
Yeah, and that's part of the mystery. Like, some say this area belongs to the Midwest. Others say it's part of the South. But given its central location, it's sometimes categorized as the Mid-South. We've heard that. So clearly you think this place as a regional crossroads has probably influenced the uniqueness of the language and dialect.
Absolutely. So there's some really interesting stuff going on. If you talk to people, actually and ask them what they think's going on, that's one way that we can understand how language is changing on the ground. I always, linguists would love to be everywhere and be in every community, but we can't be. But we can talk to people who are. And so the best way to find out what's actually changing in language is to ask the people themselves. So that's what I do. The kind of work I do is called perceptual dialectology. And I basically go to people and I say, tell me where people have a certain way of talking. I usually hand them a map and I have them draw on the map and tell me what are the varieties you know of. So I'll give them a section of this country and then they'll circle a giant swath and call it Southern drawl or whatever they do. And so when I've done this kind of work with Louisvillians in particular, they really like to sort of make Louisville stand out. First of all, Louisvillians, we don't belong to Indiana, but we don't really fit in with the rest of our state either. Louisville's kind of an island. Occasionally, they'll tie that island to Lexington, which makes a lot of sense because these are our two largest cities in the state. Beyond that, they want to talk about both Appalachia in the east and well as the rest of the state as being largely rural. So kind of setting up a tripartite division of rural, urban, and mountain rural.
So knowing all of those pieces, how would you say Louisville's language and dialect is different from the South and different from the Midwest?
Oh, that's really great. So one of the best examples I can use is what do you call a carbonated beverage?
For me, it's soda.
And where are you from originally?
I'm from Milwaukee originally.
Okay. So when we go and we look at the large dialect surveys that have been done, and we use that particular term, the very common Southern answer is Coke. And this is important because it's when you would use it in a generic form. So if I said I was going to go down the hallway to purchase one of these beverages, I would say I was going to the Coke machine, whether it was Coca-Cola or Pepsi or whatever. So a Coke machine versus a soda machine, that kind of generic term. Soda historically has a real strong tie to New England and a giant circle around St. Louis for some reason, and California. It's the historical homes of soda. And then pop is another answer that comes up. People often say, oh, pop, that's Chicago, right? It's also Appalachia. And so if you look at that map and you look at Kentucky, Coke comes up and grabs hold of most of the state, grabbing Louisville as well. And soda is kind of overlaid, and then the eastern part is pop. And so that's one really good example where we've got it all, right? But there's also kind of a shift happening nationally, I think, towards soda. So soda is winning the race of becoming the generic word there. What used to be probably soft drink would have been the most neutral generic term. Well, now soda is losing its regional identity and becoming more neutral. And in places like Kentucky, it's really important to see because we still have this kind of identity crisis going on. People who don't want to be associated with being Southern and aren't from Appalachia or don't want to be associated with being from Appalachia might choose soda because those other two terms would mark them very clearly in those regions.
That's a really great way to kind of put it. I mean, this has been a debate as old as time, so it's interesting to see that sort of all-encompassing. I feel proud to be part of the winning part, I guess. I don't know.
This is another one of those places where we're seeing language change, and we're also seeing very strong ideologies about this. So the change I can represent by the fact that I've been at UK. This is the end of my 15th year at UK. And I'd say when I started here, and some of our population numbers have changed in our student body, but I'd say that I had about a third Coke, a third soda, a third pop. Now it's really, really heavy on the soda. So that we can see just those numbers changing. The ideology is really fascinating because I've done some of these new student events and we've had students come by and add your answer to the box so we could see who's winning. And so we put the name. Oh, I say Coke and they put it in the Coke bottle or the Coke box. And so this young woman came up and she's like, oh, well, I'm going to add soda. I hate people who say Coke. She said hate. And
identity.
Yeah, I laughed because my colleague with me was a pop person and I'm a cook person. And I said, "Hey, did you hear that? She hates me." She stopped writing and looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I do," and walked away. So it's serious.
These are fighting words, like Louisville, lots of pride, lots of identity. I think that's so fascinating. It does make us so unique here as well, just having that crossroads and mix of that. I want to ask, before I let you go, outside of the many ways that we say Louisville, are there any, like, other ways that Louisville's language and dialect are unique? Are there any, I mean, of course, we've talked about Versailles, any words or phrases unique to Kentucky that really set it apart from neighboring states? Or even if we're talking just specifically about Louisville, because that in itself is so interesting.
Well, certainly there are going to be things that are related to local items. So, Louisville was known for being the home of the hot brown, and so the idea of a hot brown would have been at some point pretty localized, I would assume, before the food itself got wider spread. So sometimes the things that mark us as local are just familiarity with the local culture, the local food scene, things like that. Interestingly, in those same kinds of maps where we ask people, what do you call a carbonated beverage? Some of that historical data shows us that if you ask people, what's the word you would use for referring to a group of people or the second person plural pronoun, which word do you use? Do you know? So in standard English, it's just you. So, right, like
Okay.
you walk and you walk, both mean somebody walks, but you plural is the second one, but there's no marking on it, right?
Right.
So what's another word you might say instead of you?
Y'all?
Y'all, right? So y'all is really, really common across the South. And actually many varieties have picked up a word here because it's actually a hole in the standard paradigm. Having the same word mean singular and plural. People don't like that. They want something plural for the plural one. And so you get Ewans in Appalachia, which is actually yins in Pittsburgh. You get you guys, use guys. And actually, when you look at some of those mappings, the form you all shows up as fairly concentrated in Kentucky. And it might exist elsewhere, but Louisvillians are pretty serious about not saying y'all. They don't want to mark themselves as being Southern in that way. And so they say you all instead as a way of being more formal. But even you all is not standard.
Wow, I'm definitely going to be observing this more. I've really appreciated this conversation, Dr. Cramer. Thanks so much for being here on Track.
Thank you.
Dr. Jennifer Cramer is a linguistics professor at the University of Kentucky, specializing in sociolinguistics and discourse analysis. She holds a PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with research focused on language variation in Appalachia, the American South, and Kentucky. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Jacob Munoz, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at LouisvilleOnTrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about? Something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK or send an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, it's Louisville, or is it? Until next time, you're on track with Louisville Public Media.
Ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Meet Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Their chefs handle the shopping and chopping, delivering fresh, fully cooked meals to your door. All you have to do is heat and enjoy. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences, like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. And if you're looking to lose weight, Factor's keto meals can help you lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks. Savor nutritious, premium meals no matter how busy life gets. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factor50off and use code factor50off to get 50% off, plus free shipping on your first box. Weight loss with Factor Keto based on randomized controlled clinical trial. Results will vary depending on diet and exercise.
Sticking to New Year's resolutions can be overwhelming. That's why it's best to set easy, attainable goals. Start with staying hydrated with Brita. The Brita Elite filter makes tap water taste great and safer to drink too. Brita Elite removes 99% of lead from your water and reduces other contaminants so you'll actually want to drink it. Raise a glass of water to your 2025 hydration goals. Pick up a Brita pitcher with Elite filter today. 99% of lead certified by WQA. Substances reduced may not be in all users' water.